Two starving Apache sisters knocked on a rancher's gate in 1874 Texas, whispering, "We'll work, we'll cook, we'll serve, just let us in." What happened next changed their lives forever. Like, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. USA, UK, Canada, or anywhere in the world. Let's get started. The prairie stretched endlessly, golden grass swaying under the relentless Texas sun. Samuel Turner stood on his porch, wiping sweat from his brow after a long morning of mending fences. Life on the frontier was never easy, and at 40 he bore the weight of both years and solitude. His wife had died of fever 5 winters past, and the land, though fertile, felt empty without family. He was used to silence, to the company of cattle and the occasional ranch hand who drifted in for seasonal work. But on that day, silence broke in a way he could not have foreseen. At the far edge of his property, near the wooden gate that kept strays from wandering in, Samuel saw movement. At first, he thought it might be coyotes, or perhaps a passing traveler. But as the figures came into focus, his heart tightened. 2 girls stood barefoot in the dust, their dresses in tatters, hair tangled by wind and dirt. They looked small against the endless horizon, but their eyes held something deeper than fear. They were Apache, and Samuel knew that fact alone could have spelled danger in these lands. The older one clutched the hand of the younger, pulling her forward with the stubborn strength of someone too young to give up. Her shoulders squared, though her lips trembled. Samuel could see how thin she was, bones pressing beneath sunburned skin, yet her chin lifted as though she still carried her people's pride. The younger girl clung close, eyes darting like a skittish colt, uncertain whether to run or to cry. Samuel's grip instinctively tightened on the rifle leaning against the porch rail, though something in him hesitated before reaching for it. They stopped at the wooden gate, the younger nearly stumbling from exhaustion. The older steadied her, then raised her voice across the quiet stretch between them. "We'll work, we'll cook, we'll serve. Just let us in." Her words cut through the air like a plea and a command in one. The accent was heavy but clear, each syllable carrying the weight of desperation. Samuel froze, his chest tight. He had heard Apache voices before, usually shouted in raids or whispered in stories of bloodshed. But never had he heard one like this, begging, fragile, and yet fiercely alive. For years, Samuel had lived under the shadow of conflict. Settlers like him built fences and barns, while tribes like the Apache fought to keep the land that was once wholly theirs. He had lost neighbors to skirmishes, cattle stolen in night raids, friends buried in shallow graves after ambushes. The stories told around campfires painted the Apache as merciless, but Samuel, staring at these 2 trembling girls, found the tales clashing with what his eyes revealed. These were not warriors. They were children, fighting to exist in a world that had stripped them of nearly everything. He stood motionless, dust swirling at his boots, torn between instinct and conscience. His hand lingered near the rifle, the years of caution pressing, hard against the sudden surge of compassion. The older girl's words echoed again in his mind. "We'll work, we'll cook, we'll serve." They did not ask for charity, only a chance to trade their labor for survival. Samuel had always valued hard work, his own calloused hands, his late wife's tireless care for their home, even the ranch hands who came and went. These 2 girls, despite their frailty, had that same promise written in their eyes. The younger one swayed where she stood, her knees buckling slightly. Samuel took a step forward without realizing, as though drawn by instinct to catch her. He stopped himself, his boots grinding the dirt. He remembered too well what happened to men who lowered their guard on the frontier. Yet even as caution whispered, something deeper spoke louder. He thought of his wife, of how she once nursed a fevered traveler who collapsed near their ranch. "A life saved," she used to say, "is never wasted." The memory burned in his chest, demanding he act not with suspicion, but with mercy. The Sun beat down hotter, casting long shadows behind the sisters. The older one adjusted her grip on the younger, holding her upright with a strength born of desperation. Samuel's throat tightened. He had known hunger, though never like theirs. He had known loneliness, though theirs seemed deeper still. His cattle lowed in the distance, the only sound besides the sigh of wind. Everything in the moment felt suspended, as though the entire prairie waited for his choice. Would he turn them away, leaving them to the wolves and vultures, or would he open his gate to the unknown? His mind raced with possibilities. If he let them in, neighbors might call him a fool, accuse him of harboring enemies. The law in these parts was thin, and prejudice ran thicker than blood. He could be marked, his ranch shunned, his cattle stolen in revenge by men who saw no humanity in Apache faces. Yet if he turned them away, he knew what fate awaited: starvation, thirst, and the merciless desert. Could he carry that weight on his conscience? Could he let two young souls vanish into the dust, knowing he had the power to save them? Samuel's hand slipped from the rifle at last. He exhaled slowly, realizing how tightly he had been holding his breath. His boots carried him closer to the gate, his shadow stretching long over the dirt. The older sister straightened, her eyes widening slightly at his approach, though her grip on her sibling never faltered. He saw now how young she truly was. No more than 20, her face still carrying the softness of youth despite the hardness. Life had etched there. The younger, barely 16, leaned heavily into her sister's side, eyes half closed as though fighting sleep. Samuel stopped just a few feet away, close enough to see the cracked skin of their lips, the sweat beading. On their foreheads, his chest tightened at the sight. He opened his mouth, but words caught in his throat. For so long, he had built walls, fences around his land, barriers around his heart. To speak now meant lowering both. Finally, with a voice rough from disuse, he said, "Why here?" The question hung in the air. The older girl met his gaze, her own eyes steady despite exhaustion. "Because you are the only light we saw," she whispered. The simplicity of her answer pierced Samuel more deeply than he expected. He turned his head slightly, glancing at the empty land stretching miles. In every direction, perhaps they had seen the smoke of his chimney or the faint glimmer of sunlight on his windows. Whatever it was, they had walked until their bodies broke, and they had chosen him, the lonely rancher with more ghosts than company. The thought both humbled and burdened him. His wife's voice returned to him once more, urging him toward the choice that felt right, even if it defied the world's expectations. He gripped the gate with one hand, the rough wood warm beneath his palm. The sister's eyes followed the movement, hope flickering faintly. Samuel hesitated one last moment, weighing his fears against his humanity. Then, with a slow and deliberate motion, he unlatched the gate. The wooden bar lifted, the sound echoing in the heavy air. The older sister inhaled sharply, disbelief written across her tired face. Samuel stepped back slightly, giving them room. "Come in," he said, his voice low but firm. In that instant, the prairie seemed to exhale with him. The weight of decision finally lifted. The sisters did not move at first, as though afraid it was a trick. Samuel gestured gently, softening his features. "You'll find water here," he added, "and work, if you're willing." The younger sister finally stirred, tugging weakly at her sibling's arm. The older one nodded, guiding her forward step by step. They crossed the threshold of the gate, dust rising with each unsteady footfall. Samuel closed the gate behind them, his mind already aware that life had shifted. The frontier was merciless, but perhaps, just perhaps, there was still room for grace. Samuel watched the sisters drink with shaking hands, their lips pressing carefully against the tin cups, as if water itself were a fragile treasure that might vanish if taken too greedily. The way their eyes flickered toward him between each sip told him they had known more betrayal than mercy. He leaned back against the porch post, silent, giving them space to finish. For all his years of cattle driving and frontier toil, he had never felt the weight of another's survival resting so directly on his choice. Tonight, he was no longer just a rancher. He was their chance. The elder sister, Nayeli, wiped her mouth with the back of her hand and straightened her shoulders. Even in her weakness there was dignity, as though the desert had burned away everything but pride. Samuel respected that. Most women he knew in the settlements would have crumbled long ago, yet here she was, standing guard over her younger sister like a mother wolf. Ihiana, the younger, was quieter, her eyes large and round, following Samuel's every move with both curiosity and fear. He realized she could not have been more than 16, just a child. After they had eaten, Samuel motioned them toward the small barn where he kept his tools. He pulled out a few old blankets and laid them in the corner, a makeshift bed for the sisters. "It ain't much," he admitted, "but it'll keep the wind off tonight." The sisters exchanged a look, one of disbelief at such a gesture. No man had ever offered them shelter without demanding something in return. Their whispered words in Apache floated between them, soft as the rustle of prairie grass. Samuel didn't understand their tongue, but he understood gratitude. That night, Samuel sat by the hearth inside his cabin, staring at the flames as they popped and cracked. Memories came unbidden. His wife lost years ago to fever, the son they never had. His life had become work and silence, punctuated only by the lowing of cattle and the groan of the wind across the plains. Yet now, with 2 young lives under his roof, that silence had shifted. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he sensed that the ranch would no longer echo with emptiness. Something fragile had entered, something worth protecting. At dawn, the sisters woke before Samuel, already moving with quiet purpose. Nayeli swept the porch with a branch broom, while Ahiana fetched water from the well. When Samuel stepped outside, rubbing sleep from his eyes, he found the chores already underway. He couldn't help but smile at the sight. "You don't have to prove yourselves in one morning," he told them. Nayeli only dipped her head respectfully and replied, "We said we would work." Her voice carried the weight of a promise, and Samuel knew she meant every word. The days that followed stitched themselves into a new rhythm. Nayeli cooked meals from whatever Samuel could provide: cornmeal, beans, sometimes venison when he hunted. Ihiana tended to the chickens, her laughter softening the air whenever the hens pecked at her skirts. At first, Samuel watched them carefully, his old mistrust flickering like a stubborn flame. But each day chipped away at that hardness, until he found himself forgetting they were Apache at all. They were simply 2 young women trying to survive, just as he was. Word of their presence spread slowly among the neighboring ranchers. One afternoon, a man named Douglas rode up, spitting tobacco and frowning at the sight of the sisters working in Samuel's yard. "You best be careful, Turner," he warned. "Folks won't take kindly to you harboring the likes of them." Samuel's jaw tightened, but he said nothing until Douglas rode away. That night, staring into the fire again, he knew he had made his choice. Let the town whisper what it wanted. Compassion was worth more than reputation. He would not turn. Them out, the sisters, for their part, began to bloom under Samuel's roof. Ihiana sang quietly as she worked, melodies from her people that carried across the yard like wind chimes. Nayeli, though more guarded, allowed rare smiles to break across her face, fleeting but radiant. Samuel found himself listening for those moments, catching them like rare sunlight. He didn't seek to replace what they had lost, nor did they ask him to. What bound them together was simpler, a shared recognition that survival on the frontier required trust, and trust was a fragile seed that had finally found soil. One evening, after weeks of shared labor, Samuel sat with the sisters on the porch as the sun bled red across the horizon. "I can't change what the world thinks," he said slowly, "but here you're safe. You'll work, yes, but as part of this family, not as slaves, not as outsiders." His words hung in the warm air, and for the first time, Nayeli's eyes softened with something more than gratitude. It was belief. She reached out, placing her hand briefly on his. "Then this is our home," she whispered. As autumn rolled in, the ranch transformed. Fields were harvested, fences repaired, and the once empty house now echoed with voices. Samuel realized that loneliness, that old ache, no longer had a place. The sisters had not just found shelter, they had given him back a reason to live, a sense that even in the harshest land, compassion could carve out a sanctuary. The prairie winds still howled, and dangers still lurked beyond the horizon, but inside Samuel's gate there was peace. And in the wild heart of the frontier, that peace was nothing short of a miracle.